The snow fell in thick, silent curtains, blanketing the empty bench where Ji-hoon sat with 2 cups of steaming hot cocoa. One cup warmed his gloved hands. The other sat untouched beside him, growing cold in the winter air. He watched the steam rise and disappear into the frozen morning, just like 10 years had risen and disappeared from his life. Around him, Seoul hummed with winter energy. Couples walked hand in hand, their laughter cutting through the crisp air. Children threw snowballs, their shrieks of joy echoing off the university buildings. Street vendors called out, selling roasted chestnuts and fish-shaped pastries filled with sweet red bean paste. The city buzzed with the excitement of the first snowfall. But Ji-hoon saw none of it, heard none of it. He existed in a bubble of memory and longing, sealed off from the living world around him. He only saw the empty space beside him. The ghost of a woman who'd sat there a decade ago, laughing at something he'd said, her eyes bright with possibility. 10 winters. 10 cups of cocoa left to freeze. 10 years of waiting for a promise that everyone else had forgotten. That everyone told him to forget. He lifted the warm cup to his lips and took a sip, closing his eyes against the sweetness. The cocoa tasted like memory. Like the first time he'd bought it for her and watched her eyes light up with simple joy. Like hope that refused to die, no matter how many seasons tried to bury it beneath layers of snow and disappointment. If you believe love can outlast time itself, if you think a promise made in winter can survive a decade of silence, stay with me until the end of this story. You might find your own heart waiting on this bench with mine. And if this moves you, if you know what it means to wait for something that everyone else has given up on, I ask you to subscribe, to share this story, to let it remind you that some things are worth the wait. But first, let me tell you how it began. Ji-hoon opened his eyes and stared at the falling snow. Scientists said each flake was unique, that no two were ever exactly alike. But to him, they all looked the same now. They all reminded him of her. Of that first day when winter had brought her into his life like a gift he hadn't known he needed. He pulled his scarf tighter around his neck. Her scarf. The burgundy wool scarf she'd given back to him 10 years ago with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes. He'd washed it carefully after each winter, preserving it like a holy relic. The wool had faded slightly over the years, and one corner had started to fray, but he couldn't bear to replace it. It was the last thing she'd touched before leaving. The last piece of her that remained real and tangible in his increasingly ghost-like existence. The first snowflake of that winter had landed on her nose. That was how it started. How everything started. How his entire world had shifted on its axis without warning, without permission, without any way to go back to who he'd been before. Ji-hoon was 22 then, a quiet architecture student who spent more time with blueprints than people. He preferred the clean lines of buildings to the messy complications of human interaction. Structures made sense. You could calculate load-bearing weights, predict stress points, design for stability. People were chaotic, unpredictable, prone to collapse without warning. So he'd built his life around solitude, convincing himself it was preference rather than protection. He'd been walking across campus that day, heading to his evening studio class with his portfolio tucked under his arm. The temperature had dropped suddenly, and the first snowflakes of winter had begun to fall. Other students had hurried past, pulling scarves tighter and cursing the early arrival of cold weather. But Ji-hoon had always loved this moment. The transition from autumn to winter. The hush that fell over the world as snow began to blanket everything in white. That's when he noticed her. She was standing near the library entrance, completely still in the middle of the flowing crowd. She wore a heavy coat that looked expensive but clearly wasn't designed for Korean winters. Her dark skin stood out starkly against the white landscape, beautiful and vulnerable at the same time. She was shivering violently despite her layers, her whole body trembling in a way that made something twist in Ji-hoon's chest. Her eyes held a mixture of wonder and terror as she stared up at the falling snow, watching the flakes drift down as if they were both magical and threatening. She clutched her phone in one hand, turning it this way and that, squinting at the screen. Her other hand gripped a crumpled piece of paper with what looked like an address written on it. She was lost. That much was obvious from the way she looked around helplessly, from the slight panic in her eyes, From the way her breath came in visible puffs that seemed to quicken with each passing moment. Ji-hoon walked up to her. He didn't know why. He usually avoided situations like this, preferring to keep his head down and his interactions minimal. But something about her made him stop. Maybe it was the way she looked at the snow with such a complicated expression, like it was both beautiful and terrible. Maybe it was the loneliness he recognized in her posture, the way she stood apart from everyone else not by choice but by circumstance. "Do you need help?" he asked in careful English, the words feeling awkward in his mouth. He'd studied English for years but rarely had reason to speak it. She turned to him with such relief that it made his chest tighten. Her eyes, he noticed, were the warmest brown he'd ever seen, like honey held up to sunlight. "Yes, please," she said, and her voice had a musical quality that made him want to hear more. "I'm trying to find the International Student Center, but everything looks the same in the snow. Every building, every path. It's all just white. And it's so cold." She laughed, but it sounded close to tears. "I've never been this cold in my entire life. I thought I was prepared. I bought this coat and these gloves and these boots. But nothing prepared me for this." Ji-hoon noticed then that her coat, though thick and clearly expensive, was meant for mild winters. Her gloves were fashionable but thin. Her boots, while sturdy, weren't insulated. She'd come prepared for cold weather, but not this kind of cold. Not the bone-deep freeze of a Korean December. Without thinking, without pausing to question the impulse, he unwound the scarf from around his neck. It was burgundy wool, hand-knitted by his grandmother years ago. It had kept him warm through countless winters. "Here," he said, offering it to her with both hands, the way his mother had taught him to give gifts. She blinked at him, surprised, her eyebrows rising. "I can't take your scarf. You'll freeze. You're already being so kind helping me. I can't take your warmth too." "I'm used to it," he said simply. "You're not. And the cold here is different from what you know. It gets inside you if you're not careful." He pressed the scarf into her hands before she could protest further. "The International Center is this way. I'll show you. I'm heading in that direction anyway." This last part was a lie. His studio class was in the opposite direction. But something told him that changing his plans for this stranger was the most important decision he'd make that day. That year. That decade. She wrapped the scarf around her neck with careful, reverent movements, as if it were made of something precious rather than simple wool. He watched her shoulders relax slightly as the warmth seeped into her skin, watched color return to her cheeks. "Thank you," she said, and the gratitude in her voice was almost overwhelming in its sincerity. "I'm Amara, by the way. Amara Okafor. I just arrived from Nigeria yesterday. I'm an exchange student. International Relations. Ji-hoon. Kim Ji-hoon. Architecture. Welcome to Korea." He started walking, and she fell into step beside him, still clutching the paper with the address. They walked together through the snow, and she talked the entire way. It was as if the cold and the loneliness had been holding back a flood of words, and his simple kindness had broken the dam. She told him about the 20-hour flight, about leaving her family behind in Lagos, about her mother crying at the airport and her father trying to be strong but failing. She talked about how she'd always dreamed of studying abroad, of seeing the world beyond the borders of her home country, but hadn't expected the reality to hit like this. Hadn't expected to feel so small and lost and overwhelmed. "The snow is beautiful," she said, tilting her face up to let flakes land on her cheeks. "I've only ever seen it in movies and pictures. But it's also terrifying, you know? In Lagos, the sun is warm and constant. You know what to expect. This is like being in another world entirely. A cold, white world where I don't know the rules." Ji-hoon listened. He'd always been good at listening, at creating space for other people's words. And Amara's voice had a musical quality that made him want to hear more, that made the walk seem too short even though it took 15 minutes. She talked about her studies, about wanting to work for the United Nations one day, about building bridges between countries and cultures. About believing that understanding could solve almost any problem. Her enthusiasm was infectious, her dreams painted in broad, ambitious strokes that made his own goals seem suddenly small and contained. "What about you?" she asked as they approached the International Center. Why architecture? What made you want to build things? Ji-hoon considered the question. No one had asked him that in years. Buildings make sense, he said slowly. They follow rules. Laws of physics. Mathematics. If you design them correctly, they stand. If you make mistakes, they fall. It's logical. Predictable. She looked at him with those warm brown eyes, and he had the uncomfortable feeling she could see right through his carefully constructed walls. That sounds safe, she observed. Not that there's anything wrong with safe. Sometimes safe is exactly what we need. When they reached the International Center, she stopped at the entrance and turned to give back the scarf, carefully unwinding it from around her neck. Keep it, he said quickly, perhaps too quickly. Until you get a better one. A warmer one meant for this kind of winter. She smiled then, and Ji-hoon felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been frozen for years suddenly cracking, letting light through. But then how will I return it to you? I can't keep your grandmother's scarf. You said she made it, right? I could tell from the way you held it. He hesitated, suddenly aware that this was a crossroads. He could say goodbye, walk away, return to his safe, solitary life. Or he could take a risk on this stranger who talked with her hands and looked at snow like it was both miracle and menace. He pulled out his phone with hands that trembled slightly, though not from cold. Maybe we could meet for coffee. I could show you around campus. Help you adjust. The first few weeks in a new country are always the hardest. That's what people say, anyway. Her smile widened, and Ji-hoon felt his heart do something strange and unfamiliar in his chest. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. They exchanged numbers, their gloved fingers fumbling with phone screens. She waved as she headed into the building, the burgundy scarf bright against her dark skin and heavy coat. Ji-hoon stood there for a long moment after she disappeared inside, snow falling around him, his neck suddenly cold without the scarf. He'd missed his studio class. Would have to email his professor with some excuse. But he couldn't bring himself to care. Something had just happened. Something important. He could feel it in the way his heart continued to beat unevenly, in the way the world looked somehow brighter despite the grey winter sky. That coffee meeting turned into dinner 2 days later. Amara had texted him the next morning with a simple message that made him smile at his phone like an idiot. Still alive. Haven't frozen to death yet. Thanks to your scarf. When can I see you again? They met at a small cafe near campus, one of those hole-in-the-wall places that served exceptional coffee and mediocre food. Amara arrived bundled in layers, the scarf wrapped twice around her neck. She'd pulled her hair back into a ponytail, and her cheeks were flushed from the cold. I ordered hot chocolate, she said as they sat down. Coffee feels too sophisticated for how lost I've been feeling. Is that okay? Do Korean people judge you for ordering hot chocolate instead of coffee? Ji-hoon laughed, surprising himself. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed out loud. I don't think anyone cares what you order. But hot chocolate is a good choice. It's more forgiving than coffee. Dinner turned into a 3-hour conversation that ranged from serious to silly and back again. Amara talked about her 5 younger siblings, about growing up in a loud, chaotic household where privacy was a luxury and family dinners were mandatory. Ji-hoon shared his own quieter upbringing as an only child, parents who were kind but distant, who showed love through actions rather than words. You're so quiet, she observed at one point, her chin propped on her hand as she studied him. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking too much. Like I'm filling all the space and not leaving any room for you. You're not talking too much, he said quickly, and he meant it with a fierceness that surprised him. I like listening to you. You make the world sound bigger than I ever imagined it. Like there are all these possibilities I've been ignoring because I was too busy looking down at blueprints. She reached across the table and took his hand, and the touch sent electricity up his arm. You make me feel safe, she said softly. That's a gift too. In a place where everything is strange and new and overwhelming, you're steady. Like a building that's been standing for 100 years. Something solid to hold on to. Dinner turned into walks through the snow-covered campus. Walks turned into hours spent in warm cafes, talking about everything and nothing. They discovered they both loved old movies, though they disagreed completely on which ones were best. She thought romantic comedies were underrated art. He argued for film noir and complex plotting. They both loved thunderstorms, though for completely different reasons. She loved the drama of it, the way the sky became a theater. He loved the mathematics of it, the precise conditions required for lightning to form. Within a week, they'd established a routine. He'd meet her after her morning classes with hot chocolate from the cafe nearby. They'd sit on a bench near the library, the same bench where Ji-hoon now waited alone, and she'd tell him about her day while the snow fell around them. "Why cocoa?" she asked one day, cupping the warm mug in her hands and breathing in the sweet steam. "Why not coffee like everyone else?" "Because it reminds me of winter," he said. "And winter reminds me of you. Of that first day when I saw you standing in the snow looking lost and brave at the same time." She laughed, that beautiful sound that made his heart race and stumble. "Then I guess winter is my favorite season now too. Even though it's trying to kill me with cold. Even though I miss the sun so much it hurts sometimes. You make winter bearable. More than bearable. You make it feel like where I'm supposed to be." Amara was studying international relations with a focus on African diplomacy. She wanted to work for the UN, to build bridges between countries the way Ji-hoon built structures. She talked with her hands, her eyes lighting up when she spoke about her dreams. She was warm and alive in a way that made Ji-hoon's carefully controlled world seem suddenly too small, too quiet, too safe. She challenged him in ways no one else ever had. Questioned his tendency to plan everything, to calculate risk, to choose safety over possibility. But she did it gently, with humor, never making him feel inadequate or wrong. Just different. Just maybe ready for something more. By February, they were inseparable. Ji-hoon's friends started calling Amara his shadow, then corrected themselves and said he was hers. Minute Woo, his roommate, would make exaggerated gagging sounds whenever they walked in together, but Ji-hoon could see the happiness in his friend's eyes. The relief that Ji-hoon had finally let someone past his walls. By March, as the last snow melted and early cherry blossoms began to appear, Ji-hoon realized he'd fallen in love. Not the quiet, hesitant love he'd read about in books. Not the careful, measured emotion he thought love should be. But something fierce and certain and terrifying in its intensity. Something that felt like jumping off a building and trusting that the air would hold him. They were walking through the campus gardens one evening, the air still cold but with a hint of spring underneath. Cherry trees lined the path, their branches just beginning to bud. Amara had been quiet that day, more subdued than usual, and Ji-hoon had learned to recognize when she needed silence rather than conversation. But suddenly she stopped walking and turned to him, her face serious in a way that made his stomach drop. "Ji-hoon, I need to tell you something," she said, and her voice trembled slightly. His heart dropped at the seriousness in her voice, at the way she wouldn't quite meet his eyes. "What is it? Are you okay? Is something wrong?" She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and finally looked at him directly. "I love you. I know it's fast, and I know we're from different worlds, and I know this probably breaks all the rules about how long you're supposed to wait before saying something like this. But I love you. And I needed you to know. Because keeping it inside was starting to hurt more than the risk of saying it out loud." Relief flooded through Ji-hoon so powerfully that he almost laughed. Almost stumbled backward with the force of it. "I love you too," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I've loved you since that first day in the snow. Maybe even before that. Maybe from the moment I decided to walk over and help you instead of keeping my head down like I always do. You've changed everything, Amara. Everything." She threw her arms around him, and he held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her heart beat against his chest. In that moment, Ji-hoon felt complete in a way he'd never experienced before. Like he'd been walking through life with a missing piece and hadn't even known it until she'd appeared and filled the empty space perfectly. But happiness, he would learn in the cruelest way possible, is often a prelude to loss. Joy makes you vulnerable. Love opens you up to pain. And the higher you climb, the farther there is to fall. It was a Thursday in late March when everything shattered. Ji-hoon was in his studio class, working on a design for a community center, when his phone buzzed. A text from Amara. Can you meet me? Now. It's important. The tone was wrong. Too flat. Too formal. Terror gripped his chest as he gathered his things and left, ignoring his professor's confused questions. He found her at their bench, the same bench that had witnessed the beginning of them. She sat hunched over, her hands clasped between her knees, her face pale and streaked with tears. He knew before she said anything that something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. He sat beside her, and she couldn't meet his eyes. She stared at her hands like they held answers she couldn't find. My visa, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. There's a problem. My father got sick. 3 weeks ago. A stroke. He's stable now, but the medical bills are enormous. We thought we had insurance, but there were complications, clauses we didn't understand. The bills keep coming, and we can't afford both his treatment and my tuition. I have to go home. Ji-hoon felt his world tilt, felt everything he'd built in the past 4 months crumble like a structure with faulty foundation. When? He managed to ask, though his throat felt like it was closing. Next week. She finally looked at him, and the devastation in her eyes almost broke him. I'm so sorry, Ji-hoon. I tried everything. I applied for extensions, for scholarships, for emergency loans. But there's no time. The university is giving me 7 days to arrange my departure. My visa expires, and I have to go. No, he said, his voice rough and desperate. There has to be something we can do. I can help. I can work, I can get loans. My parents have some savings. We can figure this out. We have to figure this out. You're a student too, she said gently, reaching for his hand. You can't fix this. This isn't something money can solve quickly enough. My father needs care. My family needs me. And I need to be there for them. I can't abandon them when they need me most. Then I'll wait, Ji-hoon said firmly, gripping her hand. I'll wait for you. However long it takes. A year. 2 years. 10 years. I'll wait. You can't promise that, she whispered, tears flowing freely now. You don't know what you're saying. Life doesn't stop because we want it to. Watch me, he said. Just watch me. The next 7 days passed in a blur of desperate plans and painful realities. They talked about the future, about staying in touch, about video calls and messages and finding a way back to each other. But behind every word was the terrible knowledge that sometimes love isn't enough to overcome circumstance. That wanting something badly enough doesn't make it possible. They spent every possible moment together. Skipped classes. Ignored friends. Existed in a bubble where nothing mattered except squeezing every last second out of the time they had left. They memorized each other's faces, each other's voices, as if they could somehow store enough memories to last through whatever separation awaited them. On her last night in Korea, they didn't sleep. They sat on their bench until dawn, wrapped in blankets Ji-hoon had brought from his apartment, talking about everything they'd never have the chance to say again. About dreams deferred and plans destroyed. About futures they'd imagined that would never come to pass. I'll come back, she whispered as the first light touched the sky, turning it pink and gold. I promise you, Ji-hoon. As soon as I can. As soon as my father is better and my family is stable and I've saved enough money. I'll come back. When? He asked, holding her hand so tightly it must have hurt. She didn't pull away. When will you come back? She looked at the melting snow around them, at the last traces of winter clinging stubbornly to life. Next winter, she said. When the snow falls again, I'll be here. I promise. Wait for me. I'll wait forever if I have to, he said. I'll wait until the world ends and the snow stops falling. I'll wait until every building I design crumbles to dust. I'll wait because there's no other choice. Because you're not just something I want, Amara. You're something I need to survive. At the bus station, snow began to fall even though it was too late in the season for it, even though the calendar said spring had arrived. As if the universe itself was acknowledging the tragedy of this separation. As if winter couldn't bear to let go until it had witnessed this ending. Amara unwrapped the burgundy scarf from around her neck, the one he'd given her that first day, and pressed it into his hands with trembling fingers. Keep this safe for me, she said, her voice breaking. When I come back, I want you to give it to me again. Just like the first time. Like we're starting over. Like none of this pain happened. Ji-hoon couldn't speak. Words had abandoned him completely. He just nodded and pulled her into his arms one last time, holding her like he could somehow anchor her to this place through sheer force of will. The bus pulled away, and Ji-hoon stood watching until the taillights disappeared into the distance. Snow covered his shoulders, his hair, the scarf clutched in his hands. He stood there as other buses came and went, as other people said their own goodbyes, as the world continued spinning without any regard for his devastation. Finally, a security guard approached him. "Sir, we're closing. You need to leave." When he finally walked away, he looked back at the spot where the bus had been. Amara's footprints in the snow were already disappearing, covered by new flakes that fell without mercy. Like the universe was already erasing evidence that she'd ever been there at all. The first winter came and went like a fever dream. Ji-hoon returned to the bench on the first day of snowfall that November. He brought 2 cups of hot cocoa, the burgundy scarf wrapped around his neck, and a heart full of desperate hope. He sat for hours, watching every woman who walked by, his heart leaping and falling with each passing stranger. Every dark coat could be her. Every quick movement in his peripheral vision might be her approach. She didn't come that day. Or the next. Or any day that entire winter. He told himself it was too soon. She'd said next winter, but maybe she needed more time. Maybe her father was still sick. Maybe she was saving money. He created 100 reasons why she wasn't there, and he believed every one of them with the fierce determination of someone who had no other choice. His friends noticed his absence from their usual gatherings. His roommate, Minute-woo, tried to talk to him one night after finding Ji-hoon sitting alone in their dark apartment, staring at his phone as if he could will it to ring. "You can't keep doing this," Minute-woo said, watching Ji-hoon put on the scarf for another vigil. "It's been months. Maybe she's moved on. Maybe she met someone else. Maybe life got in the way and the promise became impossible to keep." "She promised," Ji-hoon replied simply, flatly, as if this explained everything. As if a promise was a contract that the universe had to honor. "People make promises they can't keep," Minute-woo said gently. "It doesn't make them bad people. It just makes them human. Not her. Not this promise." The second winter came and went with the same ritual. The bench. The cocoa. The watching. Ji-hoon's hope had dulled slightly, worn down by months of disappointment, but he couldn't let it go. Wouldn't let it go. The third winter brought its own particular brand of pain. Ji-hoon graduated that year and started working at a prestigious architecture firm. His designs were innovative and thoughtful, earning praise from senior partners who saw in him a rare combination of technical skill and artistic vision. His colleagues respected him. Clients requested him specifically. But every winter, when the first snow fell, he'd leave work early and go to the bench. 2 cups of cocoa. Her scarf. And the endless, faithful watching. His supervisor called him in one day. "Ji-hoon, you're one of our most talented architects. But you disappear for months every winter. It's becoming a problem. Clients are noticing. Projects are getting delayed." "I'll make up the time," Ji-hoon said. "I'll work twice as hard the rest of the year. But winters are non-negotiable." The supervisor studied him for a long moment. "This is about a woman, isn't it?" Ji-hoon didn't answer. Didn't need to. By the 4th winter, his mother started introducing him to eligible women. Nice girls from good families. Women with stable careers and appropriate backgrounds. Ji-hoon went to a few of these meetings to please her, sitting through awkward dinners where he made polite conversation and felt absolutely nothing. He tried to date one of them, a lawyer named Sejin who was intelligent and kind and beautiful in a classic way. They went to dinner 3 times. She talked about her work, her family, her aspirations. He listened and responded appropriately. But it all felt hollow, like going through motions someone else had choreographed. On the 4th date, she looked at him across the table with something like pity in her eyes and sighed. "You're not here, are you?" she asked gently. "Not really. Your body is here, but your heart is somewhere else entirely. With someone else. I'm sorry, Ji-hoon said, and he meant it. You deserve better than this. Better than someone who can't fully commit because he's still waiting for a ghost. Sujin stood up and touched his shoulder kindly. Whoever she is, I hope she knows how lucky she is. I hope she comes back. But Ji-hoon, don't wait so long that you forget how to live. Don't let waiting become your entire existence. But that was exactly what was happening. Ji-hoon's existence had become mechanical, predictable, empty. Work. Sleep. Wait. Wait through springs and summers and autumns for that one season when hope felt possible again. Even though each winter brought fresh disappointment, he couldn't stop. The waiting had become who he was. The fifth and sixth winters blurred together in his memory. Ji-hoon stopped talking about Amara to his friends. They'd given up trying to convince him to move on, their concern shifting from active intervention to sad acceptance. Even Minute-woo, who'd been his closest friend since freshman year, stopped mentioning it. The silence around her absence grew louder than any words could be. By the seventh winter, his waiting had become an accepted part of who he was. Ji-hoon would simply announce at work that he was unavailable from the first snowfall onwards, and no one questioned it anymore. The brilliant architect who disappeared every winter. The man haunted by a promise. The fool who wouldn't move on. His career flourished despite his seasonal absence. He became a senior architect, then a partner at the firm. His buildings were featured in architecture magazines. Students studied his designs. People called him a genius, a visionary. At 30, he had everything society said a man should want: wealth, respect, professional success, a beautiful apartment overlooking the city. Except her. Except the one thing that mattered. His apartment filled with awards and recognition. Glass trophies lined one bookshelf. Framed magazine covers hung on the walls. But the scarf, that faded burgundy scarf, hung by his door like a shrine to something lost. He'd wash it carefully after each season, making sure it stayed exactly as it had been when she'd worn it, when her scent had clung to the wool. The scent had faded years ago. But Ji-hoon could still smell it sometimes, in his imagination, in his desperate need to hold onto something tangible. During the 8th winter, his father died suddenly. A heart attack. Quick and unexpected. Ji-hoon sat on the bench the day after the funeral, snow falling around him in thick, heavy flakes, and realized he'd become a ghost in his own life. He attended the living world but didn't participate in it. He moved through days like smoke through air, present but not substantial. A man-shaped hole in the universe. His mother held his hand at the funeral reception, her own eyes red from crying. "You're killing yourself slowly," she whispered. "This waiting, this refusing to live. Your father worried about you. We both did. Please, my son. Let her go. Let yourself live again." "I can't," he said. "I made a promise too. I promised to wait. And if I break that promise, then what was any of this for? What did I sacrifice for?" The 9th winter was the hardest. Ji-hoon was 31 now, and for the first time, real doubt crept in. Not doubt about his love for Amara. That had never wavered, never diminished even slightly. But doubt about the waiting itself. About whether love could survive this long on hope alone, on memory, on a promise made by two young people who'd had no idea what they were committing to. He sat on the bench one particularly cold day, and for the first time in 9 years, he wondered if he was a fool. If everyone had been right all along. If he'd wasted the best decade of his life on a beautiful lie that he'd told himself to avoid the pain of moving forward. The cocoa grew cold in his hands. Both cups, this time. He couldn't even bring himself to drink his own. A child ran past chasing a puppy, laughing with pure joy. Ji-hoon watched them and couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed like that. Couldn't remember the last time he'd felt joy that wasn't tinged with longing or loss. But even with doubt gnawing at his heart like a living thing, he came back the next day. And the day after. Because what else could he do? The waiting had become who he was. To stop would be to admit that the best part of his life, the most real thing he'd ever experienced, had been nothing but a beautiful mistake. And he couldn't do that. Wouldn't survive it. The 10th winter arrived with a vengeance. The coldest in years, meteorologists said. Record-breaking snowfall. Temperatures that made even native Koreans huddle indoors and complain. Ji-hoon stood in his apartment on the first morning of snowfall, holding the scarf in his hands. 10 years. A decade of waiting. Of hoping. Of loving someone who existed more in memory than in reality. Someone he'd built into a monument so perfect that no real person could ever match it. He was 32 now. His hair had started to grey at the temples, silver strands that caught the light. Lines had appeared around his eyes from squinting at blueprints, from years of careful, precise work. His hands were steady from drafting, his shoulders strong from hours bent over design tables. He'd achieved professional success beyond his wildest dreams, wealth beyond what his parents had ever imagined for him. But his personal life was a wasteland. A desert of missed opportunities and abandoned possibilities. 10 years of saying no to every chance at happiness because he was waiting for one specific version of it. This is the last time, he told his reflection in the mirror, the words tasting like ash. One more winter. If she doesn't come this year, I'll let go. I'll try to move forward. I'll finally admit that some promises can't be kept no matter how much we want them to be. The lie felt heavy in his mouth. But he said it anyway, because he needed to say it. Needed to feel like he had some control over his own fate. On the first day of snowfall, Ji-hoon walked to the bench with steps that felt heavier than usual. The weight of 10 years pressed down on his shoulders like accumulated snow. The scarf around his neck felt like a chain. The 2 cups of cocoa felt like offerings at a shrine to something long dead. He sat down on the familiar bench, the cold seeping through his coat. Around him, life continued its relentless march forward. Families laughed. Lovers held hands. Children played. Students hurried to classes. The world moved on because that's what the world does. It doesn't stop for anyone's grief or anyone's waiting. But Ji-hoon existed in a separate space. A pocket of time that had been frozen 10 years ago. A bubble where nothing changed because change meant admitting defeat. Time moved forward. My heart stayed where she left it. The words had become his mantra over the years. A prayer to a God who didn't listen. A justification for a choice that looked more foolish with each passing season. He sat there for an hour, then 2. The sun began its descent, painting the snow pink and gold and orange. Ji-hoon watched it all with tired eyes, eyes that had seen this same sunset countless times. Beautiful, he thought distantly. Everything is still beautiful. I just can't feel it anymore. I'm numb to everything except the absence. He was about to stand, about to end this vigil and perhaps all the vigils to come, when he felt it. That inexplicable sensation of being watched. That primitive instinct that makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck when someone's eyes are on you. Ji-hoon turned slowly, afraid to look. Afraid of what he'd see. Afraid of finding nothing but another stranger. Afraid of his own hope, which had become a weapon he used against himself. A woman stood about 50 feet away, partially obscured by falling snow. She wore a heavy winter coat, properly insulated this time. A wool hat pulled low over her ears. Her hands clenched at her sides, fingers curled into fists. Even from this distance, Ji-hoon could see she was trembling. But it wasn't the cold that made her shake. Ji-hoon's heart stopped. Started again. Stopped once more. The world tilted, reformed, broke apart and reassembled into something new. He knew that face. He'd seen it every day for 10 years in his dreams, in his memories, in every woman who walked past but wasn't her. He'd memorized every curve, every line, every expression. Had held that face in his mind like a talisman against forgetting. Amara. She took a hesitant step forward, her foot crunching in the snow. Then another. Moving like someone walking through a dream, unsure if the ground would hold. Her face was older, marked by time and pain he knew nothing about. Lines around her eyes. A weariness in her expression that spoke of hard years and harder choices. But her eyes were the same. Those warm brown eyes that had lit up his entire world 10 winters ago. Ji-hoon couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. His body had forgotten how to function. He was afraid that if he blinked, if he breathed, if he acknowledged this moment as real, she'd disappear like snow in sunlight. Like a dream at dawn. Like every other hope that had melted away under scrutiny. She walked closer. Slowly. Each step deliberate. As if she too was afraid this wasn't real. Afraid that if she moved too quickly, the illusion would shatter and she'd find herself back in Lagos, still trying to save enough money for a plane ticket she could never quite afford. When she reached the bench, she stopped. Her eyes went immediately to the scarf around his neck, and her hand flew to her mouth. A sound escaped her, something between a laugh and a sob. "You kept it," she whispered, and her voice was exactly as he remembered. Musical. Warm. Real. "All this time, you kept it. You've been wearing it." Ji-hoon tried to speak, but his throat had closed completely. Words had abandoned him. 10 years of things he'd wanted to say, and now he couldn't form a single syllable. He nodded instead, a jerky movement that felt foreign to his own body. "Can I sit?" Her voice trembled. Different from before. Worn. Tired. But still hers. Still the voice that had narrated his dreams for a decade. "Is it okay if I sit?" He nodded again, not trusting himself to speak. Not sure his voice would work even if he tried. Amara sat beside him, in the exact spot she'd occupied 10 years ago. The same bench. The same angle. Like the universe had marked her place and held it all this time. They sat in silence, watching the snow fall between them like a curtain of memory, like accumulated years made visible. Minutes passed. Or hours. Time had stopped meaning anything. Ji-hoon was aware of her breathing, of the small movements she made as she settled herself. Of the way she clutched her hands together in her lap. "I'm sorry." The words finally came from her, broken and raw. "I'm so sorry, Ji-hoon. For everything. For all of it. For the wait. For the silence. For breaking a promise I swore I'd keep." The sound of her saying his name after so long broke something in him. "Why?" The word came out rough, scraped raw by 10 years of waiting. "Why now? Why not the first winter? Or the second? Or any of the 8 winters in between? Why did you make me wait this long?" Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't look away. She met his eyes directly, letting him see her pain. "My father died 3 months after I got home. Just 3 months. We'd spent everything on his treatment, everything we had and everything we could borrow, and then he was gone anyway. And we were left with nothing but debt and grief." She wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "I had to work. 2 jobs. 3 at one point. I had to support my mother and my younger siblings. Every year, I told myself the next year would be different. The next winter, I'd have enough saved. But there was always something. Always another emergency. My brother needed surgery. My sister needed school fees. My mother got sick. Every time I got close to having enough for a ticket, life would intervene and take it away." "I understand that part," Ji-hoon said quietly. "But why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call, or write, or send a message? Anything? Did you know what not hearing from you did to me?" "I was ashamed," she confessed, her voice barely audible. Every year that passed made it harder to reach out. "What could I say? Sorry I broke my promise again. Sorry life is harder than I thought. Sorry I'm not the person you fell in love with anymore." And then, as the years passed, I became afraid. Terrified, actually. Afraid that you'd moved on. That you'd found someone else. That I'd waited too long and destroyed the most beautiful thing in my life through my own failures. 10 years, Ji-hoon said, and there was anger in his voice now. Good, healthy anger that he'd suppressed for too long. 10 years, Amara. Do you know what that does to a person? Do you have any idea what it's like to watch every winter come and go, to see everyone else move forward with their lives while you're stuck in the same moment? While you're haunted by a promise? "I know," she whispered. "I know, and I understand if you hate me now. I understand if you can't forgive this. God knows I haven't forgiven myself. But I had to come. I had to see you one more time, even if it's only to say goodbye. Even if it's only to tell you that I'm sorry and that you should move on and that you deserve someone who doesn't break promises." "Hate you?" Ji-hoon turned to look at her fully for the first time. Really look at her. He saw the lines around her eyes, The exhaustion etched into her face, the weight of the years she'd carried alone. He saw pain that matched his own. Sacrifice that mirrored his waiting. I could never hate you. That's the problem, don't you see? That's what makes this so hard. I tried. God, I tried. I tried to move on, to forget, to fall in love with someone else. But I couldn't. Because every part of me still belongs to you. Because 10 years of waiting didn't change how I feel. It only made it worse. Amara let out a sob, covering her face with her hands. Her whole body shook with the force of her crying. I thought about you every single day, she said through her tears. Every snowstorm in Lagos, which we barely get. Every winter. Every moment. I'd close my eyes and imagine sitting here with you. I wrote you letters I never sent because I was too ashamed. Hundreds of letters. I practiced speeches in my mirror. I rehearsed what I'd say when I finally came back. And when I finally saved enough to come back, when I finally had a job offer in Seoul and a visa that would last, I was terrified. Terrified that too much time had passed. That love couldn't survive this kind of absence. Ji-hoon reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His hands trembled as he scrolled through his photos. He held the screen out to her. Amara looked at the screen through her tears. It showed the bench covered in snow. In the photo, 2 cups of cocoa sat side by side, steam rising from both. The date on the photo was from last winter. December 10th. He swiped. Another photo. The same bench, different angle, different day. The date from 2 years ago. January 5th. He swiped again. And again. And again. 10 winters of photos. Hundreds of images. The same bench. The same 2 cups. Different snow. Different light. But always waiting. Always the same faithful vigil. I never missed a single snowfall, Ji-hoon said, his own voice breaking now. Not one. Not even when I was sick. Not even when my father died. Not even when everyone told me I was wasting my life. Because I made you a promise too. I promised to wait. And I keep my promises, Amara. Even when they destroy me. Even when they turn me into a ghost. I keep them. Amara broke down completely then, her body shaking with sobs that sounded like they'd been held back for years. Ji-hoon pulled her against him, wrapping his arms around her for the first time in 10 years. She felt different. The same. Familiar and foreign all at once. Thinner than before. Harder in some ways, softer in others. But still her. Still Amara. I'm here now, she whispered against his chest, her words muffled by his coat and her own tears. I'm finally here. I have a job in Seoul. A real one. A good one. International consulting. I'm not leaving this time. I'm staying. I have an apartment. A visa. A life here now. I'm not leaving you again. Ji-hoon held her tighter, afraid that if he let go, reality would reassert itself and this would turn out to be just another dream. Just another winter hallucination born of desperate hope. His own eyes burned with tears he'd refused to shed for 10 years. Tears he'd locked away because crying felt like giving up. They stayed like that as the snow fell around them. Around the bench that had witnessed their beginning and their long separation. Around the 2 cups of cocoa that had finally found their purpose. The world continued around them, but they were in their own bubble. Their own moment outside of time. After what might have been minutes or hours, Amara pulled back slightly. She looked at the untouched cup of cocoa beside them, snow starting to settle on its lid. Is that for me? She asked with a watery smile, a ghost of her old humor showing through. It's always been for you, Ji-hoon said. Every winter. Every cup. Always for you. He picked it up and offered it to her with both hands, the way he'd offered the scarf 10 years ago. A gift. A welcome. A promise renewed. She took it, her cold fingers wrapping around the cup. It's cold, she observed, and there was something profound in this simple statement. So was the wait, he replied. So were all these years. But love never froze. Not once. Not ever. No matter how cold the winters got. No matter how impossible it seemed. She looked at him, really looked at him. At the grey in his hair that hadn't been there before. At the lines around his eyes. At the way the years had changed him, shaped him, marked him. But his eyes were the same. Still steady. Still certain. Still full of the same love she'd left behind. "I don't deserve you," she said quietly. "I broke my promise. I made you wait 10 years. I should have been braver. Should have reached out. Should have found a way. Maybe you don't deserve me," he said. "And maybe I don't deserve you. Maybe we're both flawed people who made impossible promises and somehow, against all logic, kept them in our own ways. But you have me anyway. You've had me for 10 years. You'll have me for 10 more. For as many winters as we get. For whatever time we have left." Amara set the cup down carefully and unwound her own scarf. She reached for his, the burgundy one that had started everything, and gently removed it from around his neck with reverent hands. "May I?" she asked, holding it like something precious. He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. She wrapped it around her neck slowly, carefully, savoring the moment. The gesture was so familiar, so achingly reminiscent of that first winter, that Ji-hoon felt his heart crack and heal at the same time. Break and mend in a single moment. "Now give it back," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked confused for a moment, then understood. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. She unwound the scarf again and held it out to him with trembling hands. Ji-hoon took it and, just like 10 years ago, wrapped it gently around her neck. His fingers brushed her skin, and he felt her shiver at the contact. Their eyes met, held. "There," he said. "Now we can start again. Now we can try to build something new from what we've survived." "Starting again," she murmured, her hand touching the scarf. "I like the sound of that. I like it very much." They stood up together, their hands finding each other naturally, fingers intertwining like they'd never been apart. Like the 10 years had been just a breath. Just a pause in a conversation that could now continue. "Where do we go from here?" Amara asked, looking around at the campus that had been the backdrop to their love story. Ji-hoon looked around too. At the library where they'd met. At the cafes where they'd talked for hours. At the paths they'd walked together before the world had torn them apart. "Forward," he said simply. "We go forward. Together. No more waiting. No more winters alone. Just forward, together." They started walking, leaving the bench behind. Not abandoning it, but releasing it from its duty. Their footprints in the snow were side by side now, not one set trailing behind in lonely pursuit of the other. Equal. Together. Moving at the same pace toward the same destination. "Tell me everything," Amara said, leaning into him as they walked. "I want to know about the last 10 years. Every building you designed. Every winter you waited. Every moment I missed. Everything." "Only if you tell me your story too," Ji-hoon replied. "All the years we were apart. All the struggles. All the reasons you had to stay away. I want to know it all. Every hard decision. Every sacrifice. Every moment that brought you back to me." "Deal," she said, squeezing his hand. They talked as they walked, filling in the gaps of 10 years with words that tumbled out like melting snow. There was pain in the sharing, yes. Regret for the time they'd lost. Anger at the circumstances that had kept them apart. But there was also relief. The overwhelming relief of finally being in the same place at the same time with the same goal. If this story has touched your heart, if you understand what it means to wait for something everyone else says you should give up on, then help me share it. Subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment telling me about your own story of waiting, of hoping, of promises that seemed impossible but somehow held true. Let this story be a reminder that some things are worth the wait. Because at the end of it all, love isn't about perfect timing. It's about perfect faith. Faith that some people are worth waiting for. Some promises are worth keeping even when they cost you everything. Some winters are worth enduring because spring will come. And it always does. Spring always comes. Always.